History is so often written in the rigid, unfeeling language of numbers. We measure the supposed greatness of an empire by the vastness of its conquered territories, by the colossal tonnage of its warships, and by the sheer volume of steel it can forge into instruments of destruction. But tonight, we are going to slowly turn the page to a very different kind of history. A chapter not written with ink on parchment, but carved deep into the flesh of the earth by millions of tons of white-hot metal, only to eventually and quietly sink back into the silent dust of time. Right now, if you are resting against your pillows, I invite you to pull the blankets up over your shoulders. Let go of the tension in your jaw. Allow your breathing to slow down, close your eyes, and let me guide you back through the mists of time, beneath a sky once heavy with thunder and fire. We live in a modern era where, on any given night, you can simply turn on a late-night news broadcast and watch the chilling, precise glow of cruise missiles tearing through the dark sky in some distant corner of the world. Brilliant flashes of light bloom and fade in an instant, followed by deep, rumbling echoes that seem to rattle the very glass of your screen. In moments like these, it is so easy to believe that advanced machinery and supreme technological might hold the absolute power to dictate the fate of the world. Yet, lingering in the shadows of the 20th century, there lies a profound, almost haunting paradox that completely unraveled the minds of the era's most brilliant military strategists. If sheer military superiority and cutting-edge weaponry are the ultimate keys to victory, then how did the most devastating, unchallenged aerial superpower in the history of human civilization find itself completely paralyzed and ultimately defeated by an agrarian nation, a place where the earth was still tilled by hand and where people walked the muddy trails in bare feet and simple brown garments? Let the rhythmic, quiet ticking of the clock on your wall pull us back 6 decades. Drifting far away from the quiet warmth of your bedroom, we find ourselves stepping into the endless, cavernous, and sterile corridors of the Pentagon in the early, damp spring of 1965. The atmosphere here is so heavy and so profoundly silent that you can hear the sharp, dry echo of leather dress shoes clicking against the polished marble floors. There is no scent of damp earth or rustling pine trees here. The air is entirely artificial. It smells faintly of chemical floor wax, the thick, suffocating smoke of imported Havana cigars, and the bitter, acidic tang of black coffee that has been left to go cold in porcelain cups. Inside one of the most heavily guarded, soundproofed rooms, bathed in the pale, unforgiving hum of fluorescent lights, the men considered to be the absolute elite of American intellect are leaning over massive, sprawling maps. At the very center of this colossal bureaucratic machine stands the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. He is a man of immaculate order, with perfectly slicked hair and cold, wire-rimmed glasses that catch the artificial light. He does not view war through the weary, bloodshot eyes of a soldier crouching in a flooded trench. He views it through the detached, calculating lens of a former corporate executive. To him, the entire world, including the delicate balance of human life and death, is simply a matrix of data, a problem to be quantified, meticulously measured, and perfectly optimized through the cold logic of mathematical equations. In the minds of the strategic planners seated around that heavy oak table, war was nothing more than an exercise in cost-benefit analysis. They placed their absolute, unwavering faith in the massive IBM mainframe computers humming relentlessly down in the subterranean basements of the Pentagon. These monstrous machines devoured reels of perforated magnetic tape day and night, spitting out what they believed were flawless, infallible predictions. According to this icy, calculated logic, if they could simply drop an overwhelming and mathematically precise tonnage of explosives, if they could inflict a level of physical and economic devastation that mathematically exceeded the enemy's breaking point, then surrender was not just expected, it was inevitable. It was the arrogant belief that the destiny of a nation could be engineered and imposed by a machine. And so, from the sterile silence of that room, one of the most ferocious and unrelenting aerial bombardment campaigns in the history of our species was drafted onto crisp, white paper. They gave it a name that echoed with hubris and biblical wrath: Operation Rolling Thunder. Their ambition was terrifyingly simple. They wanted to summon artificial clouds of metal to blot out the tropical sun. They wanted to use the ear-splitting, supersonic scream of jet engines to paralyze the collective nervous system of an entire people, forcing them to crawl to the negotiating table with trembling hands. They meticulously compiled lists of targets, everything from a tiny hidden electrical substation concealed beneath a canopy of bamboo to a humble wooden pontoon bridge swaying gently over a muddy river. Everything was reduced to a meaningless coordinate, a string of digits filed neatly inside faded yellow manila folders. They calculated with absolute certainty that it would only take 8 weeks, perhaps a few months at most, and the thunder from the sky would crush any lingering will to resist. This intoxicating confidence was so absolute that bureaucrats in Washington were already drafting the precise legal language of the surrender agreements, their pens poised and ready for the signatures of the defeated. Across military bases, spanning from mainland airstrips to massive aircraft carriers pitching in the dark ocean, colossal iron bombs, often painted with cynical jokes in white chalk, were being hoisted by heavy cranes into the bellies of waiting warplanes. The stage was perfectly set for a masterclass in mechanical destruction, but the towering arrogance of the empire had entirely blinded them to a fundamental, undeniable force of nature. While the massive gears of the war machine were eagerly grinding forward, anticipating the explosive symphony of their own victory, halfway across the earth, beneath the suffocating, humid canopy of the jungle, and deep within pitch-black earthen tunnels, a different kind of power was quietly taking a breath. A power that could not be detected by infrared sensors or plotted on a graph. If you still have your eyes closed, try to listen very closely. Beneath the mechanical roar of those early computers running their algorithms of doom, can you hear that strange, profound silence? It is the heavy stillness just before the storm breaks. Those decorated generals, sitting comfortably in their air-conditioned rooms, were tragically oblivious to the terrifying truth they were about to face. Their massive computers, capable of millions of calculations per second, had failed to account for a single, unprogrammable variable, a variable with no physical mass, no measurable dimensions, yet possessing the terrifying strength to bend forged steel and extinguish raging fires. It was the bottomless, unfathomable endurance of the human heart, defending the only soil it had ever known. Let us slowly leave the sterile, suffocating air of the Pentagon behind. Imagine the sensation of floating upward, piercing through the heavy, grey layers of rain clouds, until we finally break through into an altitude of 30,000 feet. Here, the air is unimaginably thin, and the temperature drops far below freezing. The only sound in this lonely expanse is the rhythmic, mechanical rasp of your own breathing, echoing softly inside a heavy rubber oxygen mask. You are sitting in the cramped, vibration-filled cockpit of an F-105 Thunderchief. It is a marvel of aerospace engineering, a sleek arrow of metal slicing through the stratosphere at near supersonic speeds. The sky wrapping around the canopy is an immaculate, piercing shade of deep blue, seemingly untouched by the sorrows and the chaos of the world far below. From this breathtaking, godlike vantage point, the concept of war loses all of its visceral, terrifying reality. It becomes entirely abstract. An emotionless, sterile exercise in geometry, speed, and physics. Peering through the thick, reinforced glass of the canopy, the earth below looks no different from a beautifully painted, static topographical map. You can see emerald green patches of dense jungle, winding, shimmering ribbons of brown rivers, and the tiny, insignificant geometric shapes of rural villages. There are no human faces down there. There is no scent of burning thatch roofs, no desperate cries for help echoing in the wind, no blood soaking into the soil. To the young men sitting strapped into these ejection seats, warfare is reduced to a glowing green blip on a circular radar screen. It is the precise alignment of a mechanical crosshair, and the simple, effortless press of a small red button located on the control stick. When the heavy payload is finally released, the massive aircraft shudders, briefly, suddenly freed from thousands of pounds of iron. Looking down, silently, almost like watching a slow-motion film, beautiful but deadly blossoms of grey smoke and brilliant orange fire silently unfold across the green canvas of the Earth. The thick glass of the cockpit insulates the pilots from the deafening shockwaves. The extreme altitude insulates their minds from the agonizing guilt. It is a terrifyingly clean, detached way to deliver absolute devastation. It is a chessboard suspended in the clouds, where the pieces are swept away without anyone ever having to touch them. But as the weeks slowly stretched into agonizing months, the pristine, confident algorithms back in Washington began to fracture and bleed. The expected white flags of surrender never appeared on the horizon. Hanoi did not yield to the thunder. A cold, sharp frustration began to silently infect the entire chain of command. The strategic theory of graduated escalation demanded that the pressure be constantly, mercilessly turned up. The logic dictated that if 100 bombs did not break their primitive will, perhaps 1,000 would. If the nimble fighter jets were not inflicting enough pain, it was time to summon the true leviathans of the sky. Enter the B-52 Stratofortress. Imagine looking up from the ground and seeing a dark shadow so massive that it literally blocks out the midday sun. These enormous 8-engine bombers, flying in incredibly tight, disciplined formations, were not designed to meticulously target a single bridge or a solitary concrete factory. They were designed to erase entire grid coordinates from the face of the Earth. When the long bomb bay doors of a B-52 swung open, the sky did not just rain iron, it poured an apocalypse. The Earth below did not merely shake, it convulsed in pure, unadulterated agony. This was the terrifying era of carpet bombing, where the lush, vibrant landscape was systematically and ruthlessly churned into a grey, lifeless lunar wasteland. Let your mind try to grasp the sheer, incomprehensible mathematical scale of the destruction being delivered. 7 million tons of bombs. It is a number so impossibly vast that it loses all meaning to the human brain. To put it in perspective, it is roughly 3 times the total explosive tonnage dropped by all Allied forces across all theatres of the Second World War combined. All of it poured onto a narrow strip of land barely larger than the state of New Mexico. Massive concrete bridges, engineered to withstand the test of a century, were instantly pulverized into fine white dust and twisted webs of useless rebar. Railway lines, the metallic arteries of the nation, were shredded and tossed aside like dry spaghetti. Heavy industrial complexes and vital, heavily guarded fuel depots erupted into towering, apocalyptic pillars of thick, toxic black smoke that stained the tropical clouds for weeks on end. The very surface of the Earth was physically altered forever. Lush, ancient forests that had stood for millennia were violently reduced to splintered, leafless matchsticks. Green, terraced rice paddies, lovingly cultivated by generations of ancestors, were transformed into a chaotic, endless honeycomb of massive, water-filled craters. The empire was systematically dismantling the physical infrastructure of the nation, operating under the absolute, unwavering certainty that fragile flesh and bone could never outlast forged steel and high explosives. And then, as quickly as it began, the bombing run would end. The massive, roaring planes would bank gracefully into the setting tropical sun, their steel bellies entirely empty, leaving the raging infernos far behind them. They would fly back across the border, touching down smoothly on the safe, shimmering, hot asphalt runways of airbases in Thailand, or catching the heavy arresting wires on the steel decks of aircraft carriers floating peacefully on the calm, blue sea. The pilots would unseal their heavy helmets, wipe the cold sweat of deep concentration from their brows, and step out into the warm, salty ocean breeze. Within an hour of delivering utter annihilation, they would be sitting comfortably in brightly lit, air-conditioned mess halls. They would be eating hot hamburgers, drinking ice-cold beer from glass bottles, and listening to the upbeat, static-laced tunes of rock and roll crackling merrily from a corner jukebox. It was a surreal, incredibly comfortable detachment from the apocalypse they had just left behind. In while those young men laughed and the music played in those distant, safe canteens. Far away, under the blanket of the suffocating, smoke-filled night they had just torn apart, a completely different reality was unfolding. If you are lying still in the dark right now, picture that shattered, burning landscape. In the very heart of the destruction, amidst the lingering, bitter scent of cordite and grey ash, a silent, unimaginable miracle of survival was just beginning to stir in the mud. Let us leave the sterile, brightly lit canteens of the distant air bases and slowly plunge deep into the suffocating, primal darkness of the Trong Son mountain range. Here, beneath a vast canopy of green so dense that the moonlight struggles to even touch the forest floor, the air is unimaginably thick and heavy. If you take a deep breath in your imagination, you can smell the sweet decay of rotting leaves, the dampness of wet red clay, and the sharp, metallic tang of recently burnt cordite clinging to the mist. This is a world entirely alien to the cold, clean, mathematical models of Washington. This is the realm of the earth, where the grand illusion of absolute mechanical control begins to silently, inevitably rot away. The architects of the air war were not foolish men. When they slowly realized that dropping thousands of tons of high explosives blindly into the vast, impenetrable green ocean of the jungle was not stopping the relentless flow of supplies, they turned to the ultimate god of their era. They turned to the perfection of technology. They spent billions of dollars constructing an invisible, highly classified electronic wall across the rugged width of the country. They proudly called it the McNamara Line, a monument to their belief that machines could tame the wild. From the bellies of low-flying aircraft, they dropped thousands of highly sophisticated, camouflage-painted acoustic and seismic sensors deep into the unforgiving jungle. These tiny, battery-powered marvels of engineering were perfectly designed to embed themselves silently into the mud or hang, suspended from the dark branches of ancient mahogany trees. They were meant to listen to the whispers of the forest, to detect the heavy, rhythmic thud of a marching boot, the low, distant rumble of a truck engine, or even the faint thermal signature of a passing human convoy. When triggered, these sensors would instantly beam a radio signal up to a circling relay plane, which would feed the precise coordinates directly into the massive computers back at the base. Within mere minutes, the night sky would tear open, and that exact patch of jungle would be completely incinerated by artillery or bomber strikes. It was, on the pristine white paper of military briefings, a flawless, inescapable net of electronic surveillance. But the Empire had vastly underestimated the terrifying, quiet ingenuity of a people who had lived in deep harmony with this unforgiving landscape for thousands of years. The peasant soldiers and the local guerrilla fighters did not possess mainframe computers, nor did they have advanced radar jamming equipment, but they possessed the profound, inherited wisdom of survival. When they inevitably discovered these expensive electronic ears listening to them in the dark, they did not panic, and they did not surrender. Instead, they responded with a level of primitive brilliance that completely humiliated the billion-dollar technological marvel. To trick the highly sensitive acoustic sensors, the local villagers would simply hang cheap, wooden bamboo wind chimes in the surrounding trees, letting the natural breeze trigger false alarms. They would capture hundreds of frogs, place them in metal buckets, and leave them near the listening devices to create a deafening cacophony of natural noise. To deceive the state-of-the-art thermal imaging sensors, they would light small, slow-burning fires in entirely empty, useless sectors of the forest, or hang clay jars filled with animal urine from the high branches. High above the stratosphere, the sophisticated computers would eagerly register these signals as massive, critical troop movements. The algorithms would rapidly crunch the data, the target would be firmly confirmed, and waves of heavily armed bombers would be violently dispatched into the dark night. They would unleash absolute hellfire, dropping millions of dollars worth of high explosives, tearing the ancient earth apart, only to successfully destroy a bucket of croaking frogs and a pile of smoldering twigs. The invisible electronic wall was not breached by overwhelming brute force. It was simply bypassed, rendered utterly useless by the quiet, mocking laughter of the jungle itself. This incredible resilience extended to every single aspect of the bombing campaign. The strategic planners in Washington obsessed over the destruction of bridges. To their modern, logistical minds, a bridge was a vital, irreplaceable node of transportation. They would send wave after wave of expensive thunderchiefs to bomb a massive steel and concrete bridge, frequently losing multi-million-dollar aircraft and highly trained pilots to anti-aircraft fire in the process. When the majestic bridge finally collapsed in a cloud of dust into the muddy river below, the generals would proudly cross it off their target list, mathematically calculating that the supply line was permanently, irreversibly severed. But they failed to deeply understand that in an agrarian society, the flow of life and resistance does not depend on a single, rigid structure of concrete. As soon as the sun dipped below the horizon and the terrifying, echoing roar of the jet engines faded away into the distance, the seemingly empty, devastated banks of the river would come alive. From the deep shadows of the bamboo thickets, thousands of local peasants, women, and young teenagers would silently emerge like shadows, working in complete, disciplined silence under the pale, watery moonlight. They would drag heavy wooden planks, thick bundles of buoyant bamboo, and small wooden boats into the freezing water. With astonishing speed and practiced coordination, they would link these simple pieces together, creating a hidden, makeshift pontoon bridge just a few inches below the murky surface of the water. Throughout the pitch-black night, endless columns of heavy supplies and soldiers would roll safely across this invisible, submerged crossing. And then, just before the first grey light of dawn threatened to expose them to the high-altitude reconnaissance cameras above, the bridge would simply vanish. It was quickly untied, broken apart, and dragged back under the dense, protective camouflage of the jungle canopy. When the American intelligence analysts developed their crisp aerial photographs the very next day, they saw only an empty, peaceful river flowing past the ruined, smoking pillars of the old bridge. The massive bombing raid had achieved absolutely nothing. This was the silent, unstoppable pulse of the nation. The lifeblood of the resistance was not carried by massive, vulnerable diesel trains or massive convoys of heavy trucks, but by the relentless, quiet creaking of thousands of heavily modified, simple bicycles. These bicycles, reinforced with thick bamboo poles and wrapped in heavy cloth to dampen the sound, were pushed entirely by hand. They were capable of carrying incredible loads, sometimes hundreds of kilograms of rice, essential medicine, and heavy artillery ammunition. They moved relentlessly like a massive colony of determined ants, navigating slowly through impossibly narrow, slippery, mud-slick trails carved directly into the sides of steep, deadly ravines. They were completely, perfectly invisible from the sky above. The giant, sophisticated war machine could simply not hit what it could not see. If you are lying warm and safe under your heavy blankets right now, take a deep, slow breath and try to vividly imagine the raw, physical reality of that exact moment in time. Try to picture the bare, calloused and blistered hands of young women, many barely 18 years old, belonging to the local youth shock brigades. Imagine them standing at the jagged edge of a massive, still smoking bomb crater right in the middle of a vital dirt road. The thick, acrid, poisonous smoke of high explosives is still stinging their eyes and burning their weary lungs. The night sky above them is still vibrating with the terrifying, low hum of returning bomber jets. Yet, in the heavy, oppressive silence of the jungle night, they do not hide. They bend down. They pick up jagged, heavy, sharp rocks and woven baskets full of loose, wet dirt, throwing them rhythmically into the gaping, bottomless hole. They work mechanically, silently, refusing to stop to rest until the dirt road is perfectly level again, ensuring that the vital supply trucks can pass before the sun rises. They did not have the luxury of time, nor did they have the comfort of heavy, armored, earth-moving machinery. They only had their own fragile, mortal bodies, fueled by a quiet, unbreakable resolve that no computer, no algorithm, and no mathematical equation could ever possibly quantify or destroy. Let us leave the damp, vibrating earth of the jungle and slowly travel back across the vast, dark ocean. It is the deep, freezing winter of 1968. We find ourselves standing once again inside a heavily guarded, windowless office in Washington, D.C., but the air here is no longer filled with the crisp, electric hum of blind confidence and arrogant certainty. Instead, it is suffocatingly thick with an unspoken, creeping dread. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn completely shut, blocking out the freezing rain outside, as if the powerful men inside this room are desperately trying to hide from the glaring, unforgiving light of reality. The grand, mathematical illusion of absolute control was about to completely, violently shatter. For nearly 3 excruciating years, the mighty empire had rained down an unimaginable biblical hellfire upon the small agrarian nation. They had faithfully, blindly followed the cold, logical algorithms generated by their massive computers. They had systematically pulverized the concrete bridges, incinerated the vital fuel depots, and violently transformed the lush, emerald-green landscape into a barren, lifeless, cratered moonscape. According to every single printed chart, every glowing green graph, and every meticulously calculated body count carefully filed in their folders, the enemy should have been completely, irrevocably broken. They should have been starved of resources, physically exhausted, and crawling to the negotiating table to beg for mercy on their bruised knees. And then came the Lunar New Year of 1968, the historic Tet Offensive. If you are lying in the quiet dark right now, try to imagine the sheer, icy shock that violently washed over that sterile room. Without any prior warning from the billion-dollar electronic sensors buried in the mud, without a single blip registering on the sophisticated, high-altitude radar screens, the supposedly defeated, primitive enemy suddenly rose up from the deep shadows. Tens of thousands of guerrilla fighters, the very same ordinary people who had been quietly carrying heavy supplies on reinforced bicycles through the relentless, deafening bombing raids, launched a massive, perfectly coordinated offensive. They struck simultaneously across more than 100 heavily guarded towns and cities. They even breached the towering, fortified walls of the American embassy itself. It was not just a military maneuver. It was a devastating, psychological earthquake. It was the ultimate, undeniable, and terrifying proof that the mighty machines had lied. 7 million tons of high explosives, a staggering payload 3 times larger than the apocalyptic destruction of the entire Second World War, had completely, utterly failed to break the soul of the nation. Listen to the heavy, agonizing silence settling into that Washington office now. It is a silence so profound it rings in the ears. Look closely at Robert McNamara, the brilliant, fiercely logical architect of this mechanical apocalypse. The perfectly slicked hair is now slightly unkempt. The cold, calculating eyes behind the wire-rimmed glasses are hollow, exhausted, and haunted by a chilling truth he could no longer escape or quantify. The flawless, mathematical equations had completely failed him. In the quiet, lonely depths of the freezing night, a profound, paralyzing realization slowly sank its claws into his brilliant mind. You can use a multi-million-dollar supersonic fighter jet to easily destroy a multi-million-dollar stationary industrial factory. You can effortlessly bomb static concrete structures into fine white dust. But how exactly do you bomb an ideology? How do you destroy a decentralized, entirely invisible logistical network that is not built on fragile steel railways or vulnerable supply depots, but is instead carried upon the calloused, resilient, and bleeding shoulders of millions of ordinary farmers? You cannot bomb a mother's profound love for her ancestral land. You cannot incinerate the quiet, desperate, and unbreakable resolve of a people fighting simply for their very existence. The sheer, overwhelming tragedy of the era was that this profound realization came far too late. The towering mountain of statistics, the endless reels of magnetic tape, and the arrogant, blinding pride of the empire had completely insulated them from the fundamental, raw essence of humanity. The tears of belated helplessness, the quiet gasps of a collapsing worldview, were swallowed whole in the bitter, heavy silence of that sealed room. The mighty, roaring machinery of war had finally, painfully ground to a screeching halt. It was choked, not by superior military technology, but by the relentless, unbreakable spirit of the human heart. On a quiet evening in late March, a weary president stepped in front of the television cameras. His face was lined with deep, unshakable exhaustion. The grand illusion was over. With a heavy sigh that was broadcast into millions of living rooms across the world, he announced a unilateral halt to the bombing. There were no cheers. Only the hollow, lingering echo of a deeply flawed strategy finally collapsing under its own massive weight. And so, in a moment of quiet, crushing defeat, the deafening thunder from the sky finally ceased. Operation Rolling Thunder, the most terrifying, massive, and expensive aerial bombardment campaign ever conceived by the human mind, was officially, and very quietly, cancelled. It ended not with a triumphant, glorious parade through the streets of the capital, but in a profound, suffocating deadlock. The sky above Vietnam slowly, gradually grew quiet, leaving behind a deeply shattered earth and a haunting, heavy silence that would echo loudly through the pages of history forever. Let us gently step away from the heavy, suffocating shadows of the past. Take a slow, deep breath in, and as you exhale, let the freezing, anxious winter of 1968 dissolve completely from your mind. We are leaving behind the windowless rooms, the frantic ticking of mainframe computers, and the deafening roar of jet engines. Instead, allow yourself to drift forward through the gentle current of time, arriving at a quiet, golden sunset in the peaceful countryside of modern-day Vietnam. Feel the soft, warm evening breeze rustling through the vibrant green leaves of the bamboo groves. The air here is no longer choked with the bitter, metallic scent of high explosives or burning fuel. It smells sweetly of ripening rice, of damp, fertile soil, and of wood smoke curling lazily from the chimneys of small, thatched-roof kitchens preparing the evening meal. The deep, jagged scars that once violently tore this land apart have been quietly, patiently healed by the tender hands of Mother Nature. Those massive, terrifying bomb craters, once dark pools of destruction, have been gently filled by the gentle monsoons. Today, they are tranquil, serene ponds where delicate pink lotus flowers bloom quietly upon the still water, reflecting the soft, fading light of the dusk. But what happened to all that metal? What became of the 7 million tons of forged iron and aerospace-grade steel that was so aggressively hurled from the heavens? The answer to that question holds one of the most profoundly beautiful lessons in human history. The resilient people of this land did not leave the instruments of their destruction to rust away as monuments of hatred. Instead, when the deafening thunder finally faded and the skies cleared, they walked out into the silent, shattered fields and began to gather the fallen metal. With incredible patience and quiet determination, they took the shattered remnants of supersonic fighter jets, the twisted husks of unexploded ordnance, and the heavy aluminum casings of cluster bombs, and they completely transformed them. They melted down the very weapons that were meticulously engineered to extinguish life, and from that molten metal, they forged the simple, essential tools of survival. Millions of dollars of advanced military technology were quietly hammered into sturdy cooking pots to feed families. They were shaped into sharp agricultural sickles used to harvest the golden rice from the newly healed earth. Perhaps the most deeply moving transformation of all took place in the schoolyards. The massive, hollow brass casings of artillery shells and heavy bombs, once dropped to silence the future of a nation, were carefully hung by thick ropes from the strong branches of ancient, sprawling banyan trees. Today, if you visit those rural villages, you will not hear the terrifying wail of an air raid siren. Instead, you will hear a local teacher gently striking that bomb casing with a wooden mallet. The metal rings out with a clear, resonant, and incredibly peaceful tone, serving as a school bell, happily calling a new generation of children to their classrooms. It is the ultimate, poetic defeat of war, when a weapon of mass destruction is forced to become an instrument of life, learning, and peace. As you lie there, safe and warm in your bed, let this profound truth wash over your weary mind. Think about the towering arrogance of those powerful men in Washington who genuinely believed they could mathematically calculate and control the destiny of the world. Think about their billion-dollar war machines, their flawless algorithms, and their absolute certainty. Where is all of that immense power today? It is gone. It has all turned to dust and faded memories, swallowed by the relentless, quiet river of time. The grandest strategies of empires, the most terrifying displays of physical force, and the sharpest calculations of the human ego are ultimately fragile and impermanent. Metal will always rust. The pages of military reports will inevitably yellow and crumble. The only thing that truly endured the test of time, the only force that proved to be truly invincible, was the soft, yielding strength of the earth and the quiet, persistent pulse of human love for their home. Like water slowly, patiently wearing down the hardest rock, the gentle endurance of the human spirit quietly outlasted the rigid, unfeeling iron of the war machine. Now, gently bring your awareness back to your own body. Feel the comforting weight of your shoulders sinking deeply into the soft mattress. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest with every breath you take. In our modern lives, we often build our own internal pentagon. We sit in the quiet of our minds, anxiously calculating our problems, worrying about the future, and feeling overwhelmed by the heavy pressures and deadlines that seem to constantly bomb our peace of mind. Your worries might feel as loud and as terrifying as a roaring jet engine right now. But remember the lesson of the earth. Everything is impermanent. The towering difficulties you face today, the anxieties that keep you awake, the conflicts that seem insurmountable, they are all just passing storms in the vast, endless sky of your life. Just like the dark clouds of rolling thunder, they will eventually run out of rain, they will break apart, and they will slowly fade away into nothingness. You have the same quiet, unbreakable resilience within you. You have the profound ability to absorb the shocks, to heal your internal scars, and to transform your heaviest burdens into wisdom, just like the bomb casings turned into school bells. There is no need to fight tonight. There is no need to calculate or plan for tomorrow. The history of the world is incredibly long, and it will continue to unfold without your intervention. Right now, in this exact moment, your only duty is to rest. Let go of the heavy armor you have been wearing all day. Let your mind become as still and as peaceful as a lotus pond at midnight. If this journey through the quiet shadows of the past has brought you a moment of tranquility and peace tonight, please consider leaving a gentle subscription to the channel. Let us continue to wander through the echoes of history together. But for now, draw the blankets a little closer. Close your weary eyes. May your heart be light. May your sleep be deep and untroubled. Good night, sleep well, and I will meet you again in the silent, forgotten corners of the past tomorrow night.